Um, so we'll just start. So this is actually a repeat, you guys, of last month. I think we presented this, or Joni presented this early on in the month of April. But just because, you know, we're just trying to keep with the market of the moment and touch on topics that are most important to you guys. And the month of May too, we were training heavily on multiple offers and different aspects around multiple offers. So with that, we'll just go back
Okay.
into.
Yeah, it is a situation that we're all in. I don't know if anybody's seeing some slight changes to the market condition at this point. I can go by the fact that I've had fewer questions in the last 3 or 4 days. So that's one indication that the things are a little better. But the concept of what we're doing and how we're negotiating offers right now is really crazy. It's dizzy, and it's something that we really need to talk with each other, get good ideas from each other, and see how we're getting things accepted. The biggest problem, I think, is the fact that we're getting our buyers into situations that either one, they don't like, or two, they can't afford, or three, they start to blame the closest person to them for their unsuccessful offers, and that's you, the offer writing realtor. So we want to be able to present yourself so that you continue to be their guide through this difficult time, and not to be the person that's being blamed on it. So I'll start this. As I said, this is a little bit of a repeat of what we did before, but I have edited some new things in there. And this is a page that I did edit in because when we talked last week about buyer consultation, that is critical in this type of negotiating market that we're in. So talk about with your buyer what their main objective is. The minute they start searching and getting into seeing houses or writing offers and losing houses, that time becomes way too emotional and anxious. And so talking these things through before they actually go out and look at some of the houses, get them to make their priorities. So some of the key factors, obviously, that buyers have in their heads is time. Some people are very, very determined they've got to move right away. And sometimes because of a job or other situations that are happening, they have to move right away. Maybe they've already sold their house and they're looking at homelessness for a minute unless they find a house. So time then becomes a priority. And that means you may be changing your searches at that point. You might be looking in different locations. You might be looking at different price ranges. But if time becomes the priority, then you shift all of your negotiations for time. Cost is another one. Say that they know exactly what their budget is, and maybe they've even been pre-qualified for a higher limit, but they know month to month exactly what they can afford and what their budget allows for. So having that limited budget, knowing exactly what their budget is, keeps them from that spontaneous thing of overpricing, getting into the competition of going so much over, or using the escalation clause and getting themselves into a price that they really are uncomfortable or they really can't afford. So is cost a priority? Then you make sure that you're looking at their price range, maybe lower, because most prices are going to be competitive and escalated. So instead of looking for houses that are right at their price point, go lower, because they might have to go over the listing price. And so give your buyer some room to overbid. Maybe space is their objective. They're having a new baby, or they need more rooms, or they've run out of storage space, or maybe the opposite. Maybe they have to downsize. They're living in a big 4 or 5 bedroom house now, and it's just the empty nesters. But they either need more space or they need less space. Is that a priority? Again, when you start negotiating for your buyers, you need to be negotiating their priority. And so if it's space, that's your search priority. Maybe it's school district. Let your buyers in on all of the different factors that they can find online about the different school districts. Let them search that themselves and find out the important demographics, the important cost, the important matriculation, all the things that parents use to decide on a school district, but show them where to go to make those, to make that research. Location, they say that's what real estate is all about location. So if that's their priority, maybe they only want to work and live in a certain community, in a certain neighborhood, on a certain street. It's going to make it tougher. But if location is their highest priority, then make that your priority in the search, and not to confuse the situation until they get to a point where they have to change their priority of location. A lot of people now are getting used to the idea of remote work. And I know some companies are going to be able to continue remote working for some of their employees. So maybe they no longer need to live in a more expensive area that's close to their work. Maybe now they have the opportunity to move out farther and get a lower price point for what their needs are. And family changes, actually, it's what keeps us in business all the time, because families are people's buyers' needs are always changing. It can be a divorce, it could be marriage, it could be babies, it could be empty nests, it could be a new job, it could be all sorts of things that a buyer is facing, and that changes their priority. Excuse me. So when you have this good consultation down and you figure out what their priorities are, now you can start searching, because you know what their boundaries are and you know where they can go. This is some of the concessions to the buyers are conceding right now to the sellers. And I've added what could be a problem with some of these concessions. And one of them is the escalation clause. It's always going to be a temptation to go up on an escalation clause, but the appraisal comes in and it might just ruin that whole plan. So be caution. The appraisal is going to come, and make sure that your buyers are aware of that and that they haven't escalated that price way out of the appraiser's recommendations. Incorporating the love letter in an offer, or attaching a love letter to the offer. It comes with a caution of a fair housing violation, probably toward the seller. And some sellers are now actually stating in MLS that they do not want letters attached to the seller, attached or sent to the seller. So they want to look at the offers just as they are and not consider them part of the offers, part of the seller's decision. I know a lot of people are putting out no inspections, but caution, the buyer must disclose that the buyer is aware of the risks. That disclosure is in the clause library, in the Keller Williams clause library, and make sure you add that to your offer if your buyer is eliminating the inspection. I know some agents are now writing in, they put in an inspection, but they say that the buyer will cover a certain amount of the cost of that inspection. That has risk to it too, unless you're really careful of explaining how that cost is going to be paid to the seller, what are the ramifications, what are those costs based on? Are they going to be based on actual bids? Are they going to be based on just somebody's rounding number? There's a lot of there are a lot of problems that are attached to putting in a cost of your inspection. I know some of the agents today are writing no financing, but you still have to have a proof of funds. So you can't waive the financing if you still have to sell your house because you won't get the proof of funds at that moment. You can't waive your financing if you don't have the funds there. So don't use that as a creative idea for your offer. If make sure that your buyers can actually afford that. Waiving the separate appraisal contingency might be a good idea at this point if they're getting financing because they have the appraisals within the financing contingency. I've heard some of the agents through phone calls, and they are putting in financing, but they are waiving the financing in the they're waiving the appraisal in the financing contingency. That gets a little cautious. You have to make sure that the lender is okay with that. It means that your loan is contingent on all of the things that the underwriter is asking for. And one of those things means an appraisal. So if the appraisal comes in low and you have a financing contingency, that really means that your buyer has to dig in his pockets and come up with the difference for the lender. And not all buyers have that money in their pocket. I get rid of this. Okay. And then giving the seller right to cure is definitely something you want to do today. And giving the seller no right to cure, the seller is not going to look favorably on that, because giving the seller right to cure gives the seller the actual control of the offer. So those are some of the concessions that are being tried today. More are happening every other day as the agents get more creative and the sellers get more willing. So here's some protections that the buyer usually has in an offer, and some of these protections are being left out. The biggest thing on these that are being left out of the offers in order to be competitive is making sure your buyer understands the ramifications of these. You know, especially with new buyers or buyers that haven't bought in a while, they may be listening to you and taking your advice or your suggestions as something that they're following, that they're not really sure on their own. So if you're suggesting things like waiving the financing or waiving the inspection or waiving, you know, some of the things that the seller doesn't want to see, you better make sure that your buyer understands how that all plays out. And a lot of buyers may be shaking their head up and down like, oh, that's okay, oh, that's okay, until then they find out later, usually right before closing, what that actually means, or if there is a closing. But some of these things are being omitted right now in the offers. Make sure that you cover these omissions as possible omissions with your buyer, but make sure that you tell what the risks are in eliminating these different protections. Remember, the whole offer to purchase was written, designed, and continually improved as a consumer protection contract. And it weighs heavily toward the consumer or the buyer. It's just something that, because things are being so competitive these days, do you really want your consumer, your buyer, to waive some of these protections? Any questions on any of these up to this point?
I have a quick question.
Sure, Bridget.
When your buyer says, yeah, you know, I will give the seller the right to cure, but like, let's say a bunch of stuff comes up on the inspection, can we get out of it? How do you word your response?
Right. If you're giving the seller the right to cure and there are a lot of defects, you literally have given the seller the right to say, I'll fix all of those things and you're not going anywhere, or to say, I'm not going to fix them and the offer is dead. But the point is, it's in the seller's court to decide whether the offer stays alive or the offer dies. It's not your buyer's right at this point. So your buyer has to follow whatever the seller wants to do. I think it's a good point if you're putting seller has the right to cure, that you add in there the clause that says that the seller's right to cure is done with licensed contractors, getting lien waivers, getting receipts and things like that. Put that in your offer to start with. So if you are filing a notice of defect to the seller and he's going to cure, he has to cure it using licensed vendors and such. But it does not give the buyer the option to get out of the contract at that point. Anything else? Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, closing cross credits are something that's being tossed around a lot. Make sure that you check with your buyer's lender on what the limit of closing cost credits they can ask for. I've heard of situations where the agent for the buyer is putting in enormous closing cost credits. There's a limit to those, and it's a percentage that on the loan. It's something that your lender has to approve of. If you're doing FHA and VA loans, know that you have less of a competitive value by using those because they do come with an extra appraisal in order to get an FHA loan or a VA loan. Okay. And then as the seller's point of view, if you're a listing agent, these are some of the possible responses to some of these multitude of offers that are coming in, or also some pre-offer directions in MLS. And by pre-offer directions in MLS, a good example is writing an MLS in private remarks that the seller will not accept escalation clauses with offers. We're starting to see that. It becomes too confusing for a seller when they're getting multiple offers and half of the multiple offers have escalation clauses in them. I mean, you really need a good calculator to start figuring out how that works. You can also request an MLS before you get any offers that the seller will not accept letters with the offers. Make sure that it's very clear that they will not be any letters with the offer or added to the offer will not be presented to the seller. And if you're the listing agent, make sure that's very clear. An agent yesterday called me on this and wanted the exact wording on that, that she could put then in the listing contract and also put it in MLS. So if you're wanting these directions to put in MLS, it's a good idea to make sure that they are also included in your listing contract. One of the best responses, I think, to a lot of competitive offers, if you're the listing agent, is to use the multiple counter form for all the competing offers that the seller wants to consider. It doesn't have to give it to all the offers, but just select the offers that he still wants to negotiate with. And that's, I think, a fairer way. Another response I'm seeing in MLS is they're saying highest and best offer only, which means that the seller is not going to counter anybody. He's going to review everybody's highest and best offer and he'll choose the one he likes. So there'll be no countering, there'll be no more negotiating. This is crazy, you guys. I haven't seen this kind of market response, but this is what's happening today. This is what's going on now. The other thing that's become an issue with some phone calls that Steffi and I are getting and hearing it with the agents talking in Keller Williams Facebook is how the seller is stating when the offers will be presented. And Keller Williams, I think, came up with their best response to put into MLS directions, if any, is to say this is the date and time when all offers will be presented to the seller, but then the seller maintains the right to accept prior to that date. When we talked about it in our sales meeting last Tuesday, Charlie was saying probably the best response to put in MLS is no response. That all offers come in when they come in, sellers review them when they get them, and sellers make the decision. It's a little more anxiety ridden for the agents that are writing offers, but you have to say this is a free and open market for all the offers coming in. So it's up to you and your buyer, if you're a buyer's agent, how you will want your offer to be presented. Also, remember to look at MLS and see what the directions are, if any, by the seller. Any questions on this part?
I feel like I'm starting, just a comment, I feel like well, I know I'm personally trying to do it, but pricing our listings better and more now that there's more data and more closings in the last couple months to support these higher purchase prices. I think that people can start, and I encourage people to start pricing their listings more appropriately. You know, it was kind of the Wild West in February, March, not understanding where things could go. But now I've been starting to price things higher, and I'm getting only 2 or 3 offers versus 10 to 15 offers. So
Yeah.
now that we have more data again to support these higher purchase prices, I think we can start catching up with ourselves in terms of pricing our listings. And it's hard. It was hard, more difficult, I should say, early on in the spring.
That's an excellent point, Steph, because I was hearing that some listing agents were actually on purpose putting in low listing prices to really drum up the multiple offers, wanting multiple offers. So they would put the listing price down from what the comparables would say in order to get lots of jumps on that. And that really confuses the buyer agents and the buyers, because it's so hard to do a comparative market analysis in this market. And as you say, now more data is coming in to support stronger comparative market analysis. Make sure that you and your buyer are aware of the comparative market analysis of the house that you're looking for. And you will be able to detect if the listing agent is underpricing it to get more offers or is pricing it correctly. That's a really good point.
I just have a question. So I totally understand all that you were just saying, but would you still say it's always best? Like if you're thinking about a range for a price for a home, it's always best to go a little bit on the lower end of the range because you don't want to price yourself too high.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, if you're at the top of your range and there are multiple offers, you're going to be shut out of the competition pretty quickly. Because they won't be able to go up. And that goes back to my first slide about the priority of the buyer. You know, if the budget is their priority, if they really know what their limits are and are not tempted by spontaneous offers, you don't want to show them prices at the top of their budget.
But in terms of your conversations with your seller and pricing that listing, yeah, I think it's always better to, if your seller is willing to go on the lower end of the range. It's just where you're starting your range is what we're kind of saying.
Oh, you were talking about the seller's pricing?
Yep, I was talking about the seller's
sorry.
pricing. That's okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. It's hard to keep I don't like to use the word greed, but it's hard to keep that aspect out of the seller's thought process,
Yep.
because they've been reading, about this multiple offers and high prices and 100,000 over list. I mean, it's very hard for the seller not to think, my God, what can I get for this house? So we've got to be in charge when we're helping a seller come up with a price.
Yeah, I'm going through that right now. I'm trying to negotiate with a seller. We're getting their house ready and they want to list it way too high. And how I've been just kind of protecting myself is just at every single checkpoint when it's been taking a while to get their house ready for the market, and just consistently saying, this is my recommendation. I will, of course, list it where you want me to list it, but this is my recommendation. And that's just to support and be able to point back to that when, and hopefully I'm wrong, but I can point back to that when we're going to be having a conversation about price reductions, or if an offer comes in lower than where they want it to be.
Exactly.
So I can at least point back to my original recommendation. And so anyway, that's just
well, this last slide I have here talked about a little bit, but these are some more of the creative concessions I've been hearing. If you have anything that you want to share with some really creative concessions, but I've also added some of the careful wording that some of these creative concessions can lead to. And the first one is some buyers are putting in their offer that they're not prorating for the taxes, that the buyer is going to pay the entire tax bill for the year. Buyer really needs to check with their lender first. It may affect their buyer's financing. The underwriter is going to say, well, if you can afford to do that, then you can afford, So the idea is don't just put some of these concessions in without really checking. Another one was buyers to pay part of the listing firm's commission owed by the seller. Listing agent to check with the seller about accepting this. It may affect the seller's transfer tax obligations. So if you're the listing agent and you get an offer in there and say, we'll pay part of your commission, that listing agent should check with the seller. That could affect his tax obligations. Same thing with buyer to pay for seller's closing costs or special assessments, Check with the buyer's lender before this, and the listing agent should check with the seller to make sure it doesn't affect their costs or their taxes. Always have clients check with professionals such as lawyers, lenders, tax accountants for concessions. Many offers are above and beyond the real estate's advice. So before we get too creative in these things, notice that when I talked earlier about risks that the buyers can take and actually risks that the sellers can get into, maybe you check with the professionals before you put these in your offer. Some, as I mentioned earlier, buyer to pay seller part of the cost inspection. Several of these have come up lately. And because of the way it's worded in the offer, it's not clear on how that payment is to be made. Is it going to be a credit to the seller? Is it going to be added to the purchase price of the property? Buyer's just going to pay sellers a check. I mean, nobody knows what you're talking about. So before you put these things into your offer to purchase to entice the seller, make sure you know what the ramifications are and make sure you know how it's going to be done. Any comments on that? Any other creative concessions you've heard about?
I just want to make the comment that, when you guys are including these things in your offers and you need help with wording, you always come to us. We say that all the time. But we just really want to make sure that all of this stuff too is spelled out thoroughly and kind of covering all bases. To prevent issues down the road when we come to, if we need to address any of these things. So if you need help, come to us.
Stephanie,
Right.
is there any sort of like holy grail, like template documents out there that we could like see how people word different things? I know you can sometimes click and there'll be some drop downs, but you know what I mean?
We haven't added those to our clause library, and we're not going to. It's, you know, hopefully this is not forever, these situations.
Yes.
And also everything is, you know, we need to understand the buyer's intent with it as well. Because depending on that, it could change. I mean, there's not a black and white answer for how some of these provisions can be written. So, so we don't want to include it in the clause library is what I'm saying. So, and hopefully again, this will kind of fizzle out within the year and we're not needing to do this, you know, use these things. But this is also a good segue to mention Corey Lamont's training again tomorrow. She's going to be going over her versions of how to word some of these things. And I think it's going to be kind of an open dialogue, Joni.
Mhm.
So, and this is coming from an attorney, like top dog at the WRA. So she'll be able to help craft and cover all bases and even probably be able to say some things or offer some things that we haven't been able to offer.
Right.
So
Right.
we definitely want you guys to go to that tomorrow. That's at noon. And are you guys all aware of that? No? Okay. I will send the registration link in our chat.
Good. Yeah, I mean, all of this, you know, in the slide presentations today and all of this, there's always a nod to the fact that we are not attorneys. And so many of these situations that we're either adding into our offers or that we are suggesting to our buyers may be considered legal advice when we have no right to give it. And so that's why I just put on some of these slides that there are cautions to these. Make sure that you are checking with the buyer's lender, make sure you're checking with legal hotline, calling Steph or me on questions on this. And if it's a legal advice, Steph and I'll be the first ones to say, we can't answer that. So yeah, just don't walk down that road alone because there are a lot of pitfalls there. And Corey will be good. Plus Corey's very funny. So she makes any topic that she's covering entertaining to listen to. And the fact that she is an attorney, she can give more guidance than Steph or I can as not being attorneys.
Here is the registration link. It's free, obviously. So tomorrow at noon.
Can I ask a question on escalation?
Sure.
So with a lot of the offers I've been writing lately, they've obviously include escalation. And I've had a couple agents over the weekend say like, don't include escalators. And obviously, you know, there's a conversation I need to have with the buyer and understand what their desire is. But is there a thought at all about, because sellers are being inundated with all these escalators, that just a cleaner offer with just a very good offer price is more attractive than an escalator? And is there a way to almost hint at the fact of the option to be able to potentially counter that with a, let's say, higher pre-approval letter. So if I'm on the listing side and I see, well, maybe this offer isn't as high as the escalator, but it's a very clean offer, and I see that they have a pre-approval letter that is or it feels a little less complicated to deal with that offer than it does to deal with all the escalator clauses. I'm just trying to
Right.
think, is there a better way to use to eliminate the escalator, because everybody's using it, to pull yourself forward in the offer?
I just know, I think the idea is confusing, especially with multiple escalation clauses that a seller is looking at. The other problem is there are many listing agents that still don't understand it either. And we've come into some problems trying to untangle several escalation clauses for a listing agent or a buyer's agent being caught up in that tangle, because the listing agent didn't know really how to explain it or to sort it out for the seller. It's a complicated mathematical and conceptual idea. And now with some sellers or some listing agents putting in MLS highest and best only, that's sort of a ramification of what's happening with all these escalation clauses. One of our top agents in this company figured this out about 2 years ago, before it even got this hectic. And he decided to stop writing all escalation clauses. He believed in a clean, strong, attractive offer with very, very little things to argue about. But this was their highest and best clean offer. And he was being very successful. And I don't know how it's happening today with it being even more competitive, but I still like the idea of a clean, strong offer.
That's an interesting perspective, because I didn't assume that other agents had a difficult time understanding the escalation. It seems so common. I have only been in the business for about a year. It seems very straightforward and cut and dry, but that is quite eye-opening, because when I talked to the agent yesterday, or I submitted an offer on Saturday, she said, we don't like escalations because it's too complicated. And I asked her, I said, can you help me understand the complication of it? Well, it's going through the offers, and it's, and it's having to find the other offer that's the higher offer. And in my mind, I'm like, it sounds like you're lazy, honestly. And you just don't want to do the work to provide your seller with their best option. But maybe there is some truth to that. Maybe there is some truth to the fact that while we write it in legal language, it's difficult for some agents to understand really what that means. And
just even the small point in an escalation clause that it has to be between the buyer and the seller. There are a lot of agents that still don't get that. And they are presenting that escalation clause directly to the buyer, directly to the seller, when it should be between buyer and seller only. And a lot of agents aren't used to that. And they read it, but they don't really absorb it enough to do it. I had another agent that she read the escalation clause as the cap was the offer that the agent was making. So they accepted the cap price without it being competitive, without another offer bumping it up there. They just took the cap and accepted that price. Now, most agents are smarter than that, but we're still dealing with agents that may not get it, may not understand how they're supposed to do the process of it, and then confusing the sellers even more.
So what I'm taking away from this is I need to educate the listing agent and a little bit better, or to at least go in with the assumption that they may not be as familiar with it as I am. And that
Can try.
When I have that conversation with the listing agent to say, hey, our offer is an escalator and here is what that means, that may
Yeah,
help
you don't
out.
want to be too condescending.
No,
No, I understand.
No, I mean, I think it's an honest conversation to just say, hey, ours has an escalator. If you're not familiar, hopefully or maybe you're not familiar with escalators, but here's what this means.
Well, I think that just makes I was just gonna say, it makes the case for having that conversation with the listing agent prior to writing. I mean, always, but another point, another reason to, because depending on the reaction will inform how you should write the offer. So, I would be cautious of a listing agent who doesn't understand it and therefore communicating to their seller that they may not want to deal with it and just writing a highest and best.
Yeah, I
Um,
wonder now on this offer that I wrote this weekend, it's a very strong offer and it has an escalation in it that, she did tell me that seller doesn't like the escalation clauses. And I said, well, this is what my buyer wants to do, which obviously at the end of the day, we have to do what the buyer wants.
Yeah.
But I think having this conversation is really I mean, it'll help me in the future with
But
these.
if you consider, if the buyers, understands their financing and understands their budget and all that, and they, in their escalation clause, put a cap that they won't go over a certain amount. I mean, you can honestly say to the buyer, if you really want this house, why not offer this cap? I mean, that's as much as you can afford. I used to use, and I've trained with it many times, the phrase, the no regret price. And makes it really clear, what's your no regret price? And that's highest and best, but it means, if anybody spends $5 more than this no regret price of yours, you're going,
Yeah.
best wishes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that kind of talk with them may be more of a winner today than a really well-written escalation clause.
Yeah. That's a good point. Thank you.
Also want to remind you guys that we are going to be offering another just general help desk every Thursday between 11:30 and 12. It'll be the same Zoom ID as the contract training on Monday, so the one that you used to enter today's meeting. We mentioned that at last week's meeting, but just stating again here, we do like the conversation that comes with these questions, and we like that you guys have the opportunity to hear the conversation and learn from each other and hear questions that you might not have known to ask, or in this business you don't know what you don't know until it's asked or until you come across a transaction that requires it. So we just definitely encourage you guys to come on Thursdays as well. So with any questions.
Yeah, and if you don't have questions, Steph and I have a long list of questions that have already been asked of us, that we can bring up for discussion. I mean, the calls that we get, or the texts or emails that we get, are from all agents, from the very, very top agents in this company to the brand new, just got their license last week. They are the people that are still calling Steph and still calling me for just incidental questions on wording, on the best approach kind of questions. But we have, a long list, of variety of these questions, and some of them can be answered in a simple response, and some of the times the agents are calling us just to speak it out, just to talk it through. And we really welcome that, the idea. But these can be examples of things that we can talk about on these Thursday open desk situations.
100%. Okay. Anything else at this time?
What time's Thursday open desk again?
11:30 to 12.
One of the things that you can think about on these Thursdays too is just, just an overview of certain parts of the offer to purchase. areas that you're not really sure about, or areas that you've run into some issues with. But because we're in such a funny market and a competitive market, we're coming up with situations that even I haven't even seen before. And the idea that we can share those and talk about those, it can be really valuable. But as Steph said, we don't want to put it in our clause libraries or anything like that, because hopefully this market will come to an end soon. We can get back to a little more normal.
Yeah. Any other questions at this time, guys? Okay.
Okay, you got our numbers.
Thank you.
Speed dial, hopefully.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.
Good.
Actually, you and I need to talk about something, but we should do that on the phone.
Okay.
So I'll call you.
Yeah, give me a call. Thanks.